Previously in the complete creation.
98 million years of evolution has caused the shrimp to evolve into spicy kung pao shrimp. Tasty, spicy kung pao shrimp. Hello again and welcome back to the final lecture in this series. I've got a lot I've got to pack into this short half hour, so let's get right to it. As I mentioned in the very first lecture of this series, this fossil sequence, the descent of man, does not exist anywhere in the world except textbooks and in the imaginations of its believers. When we go to the fossil record, what we find is fossils for both apes and man together, or in a backwards sequence. In response to my comments, one skeptic attempted to ridicule me, saying, "Oh, Ian, humans are apes." Look, you're not fooling anybody with that ridiculous argument. Humans are a group all their own. Do you see apes painting artwork? Performing complex mathematical calculations? Designing, building, operating, and maintaining complex machinery? Designing and playing complex musical instruments? Designing and building complex weaponry to participate in guerrilla warfare? Or apes posting comments on YouTube claiming that humans are apes? But I want you to know, you are not just an ape to me. You are an amazing human being designed in the image of our Creator God, and He does love you with a great love. Yes, there are similarities between apes and humans, but you can identify the fossil form just based on its bones. Why? Because they're still around today. Let's take a very brief look at some of the major differences so you can train your eyes to spot them. This picture shows an adult pygmy woman skeleton, North American adult male, and an adult male gorilla. Major differences to look for. One we already discussed in parts 25 through 30 of this series. The feet. The apes have that diverging big toe, whereas human feet are unique. Moving on up to the pelvis. The difference between apes and humans is significant. You can even tell the gender of a person just by their skeletal structure. This pygmy woman's pelvis is only 23 centimeters or about 9 inches across. I have here a replica of a chimpanzee pelvis to compare with the human female pelvis, as well as a pygmy human female pelvis. The pelvis is composed of 3 major bones. The center bone, called the sacrum, and the bottom of that bone is where your coccyx or tailbone attaches. These 2 side bones that make up your hips are called innominates. Notice the stark differences between the ape innominates, which are very long compared to human. Notice also the stark difference between the human sacrum and that of the apes, which are exceedingly long and narrow by comparison. These differences alone are so glaring that even a rank amateur can spot the differences, and you are about to put that into practice. Take a look here at these skeletons of the orangutan, female gorilla, male gorilla, chimpanzee, and human. Notice the pelvises of the apes are all radically different than that of the human. Notice the differences in the overall skeletal structure just between the female and male gorillas. The sexual dimorphism is quite pronounced, especially on the skull. That male has a pronounced ridge across the top of the head called the sagittal crest, whereas it's basically non-existent on the female. Because skulls can become smashed, distorted, and fragmented in the fossil record, small yet significant differences can become really important. For example, unless you recently got in a fist fight, you can feel a bony ridge here at the top of your nose. This enables you to wear glasses. Apes do not have this. They typically have what we call the shovel face, as you can see on the chimp and gorilla skulls. I have a quick test I call the oculus test. Oculus is the Latin word for glasses. I have here a modern human skull, and as you can see, they can wear glasses because of that bony ridge. If I take the skull fondly referred to as Mrs. Pless, we can demonstrate that she is clearly an ape. The glasses slide right off of her shovel face, and she fails the oculus test. The apes all have heavy brow ridges, whereas humans typically do not have such pronounced brow ridges. However, this is where the incredible variation we see in both humans and apes comes in. For example, in this 3D scan of a chimp's skull, the brow ridges are exceedingly small. Or in the case of the Aborigine skull, notice the size difference compared to the North American Caucasian. Notice the elongation of the skull, the heavy, robust jawbone, and especially the brow ridges, which are often presented as proof of this person being the typical dumb brute Neanderthal. In fact, that name Neanderthal has become equated with being a dumb brute. This is an evolutionary preconception that could not be possibly farther from the truth. I have here a replica of probably the most famous Neanderthal skull, Cobway 1, or the Broken Hill skull. Found in a cave in 1921, we are told it is 299,000 years old. The prominent brow ridges are what catches most people's attention and what most people consider an indication that this person was subhuman or a dumb brute. Now, they were anything but stupid. A major preconception that people are falsely led to believe is that brain size is an indicator of intelligence. This is founded in the evolution myth because we supposedly evolved from less intelligent apes who have smaller brains on average. Now, if you recall, I'm a member of Mensa, the International High IQ Society. To be a member, you have to score in the top 2% of the general population on an IQ test. Certified genius. Well, if I am a certified genius and brain size indicates intelligence, then Neanderthal man must have been a super genius because his brain case is larger than mine. Frankly, the idea that brain size is related to intelligence is a bankrupt notion, and the idea that Neanderthal man was less intelligent than we are today is also a bankrupt notion. I bring this up to expose any preconceptions that Neanderthal man was a dumb brute. Even if he was living in a cave, so what? King Saul and King David both spent an awful lot of time in caves. No one would say they were less intelligent because of that. But this Neanderthal skull has a strange, clean hole in the side. There's actually a path of holes through the skull to a larger fractured hole. The path, entry, and exit wounds sure match those made by a bullet, a .28 caliber bullet to be precise. Arrows, spears, and rods do not typically leave the same wounds as a bullet. Now, while I'm open to alternative explanations, frankly, I'm not at all convinced by any of them. I would stick with Occam's shaver and the simplest, most obvious explanation. It's a bullet wound. Shooting the skull as it lay in the cave would typically shatter the skull, not produce a nice, clean hole, as would be shown in a living bone. Now, maybe Neanderthal man had guns and such technology way back then, or perhaps this skull is nowhere near as old as it was purported to be. One of the most common questions I get is, where are all the human fossils? Well, there's one for starters, but you've been told it's not human, that it's somehow subhuman, when in fact it is completely modern man. In 1805, 2 nearly complete human skeletons were excavated from the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe. One was excavated and sent to Paris, while this one was sent to the British Museum. The fossils were found in rocks dated by the evolutionists as Miocene, or 25 million years old. So this would put completely modern man way off the scale of this fictitious sequence. This skeleton was on display in the British Museum for 50 years before it was relegated to the basement, and Bill Cooper brought it out to the attention of the world again in Ex Nihilo Journal of 1983. A great debate raged on over the fossil in both the creation and evolutionary communities for years afterwards. Geologist John Mackay went to the island of Guadeloupe, trying to locate the fossil site, and conducted a geological survey. He was able to locate a sedimentary layer which matched the reported location and the rock matrix in which the British Museum skeleton was found. That layer, of course, can be followed for kilometers and was accurately documented at the harbor of the nearby town of Moule. So John brought back his maps and documentation, presented it to the curator of the British Museum, Dr. Chris Stringer, who had to agree that the previous 85 years of geologists all labeled that layer as Lower Miocene. So, either 85 years of geologists all assigned the wrong age to that rock, or the evolution myth is falsified because you have modern man in rocks 25 million evolutionary years old. The descent of man is backwards. In his usual blunt way, John pinned down Stringer and asked him point blank, how many fossils do you know of? How many human fossils do you know of? After pondering it for a few minutes, Stringer replied with, about 30,000. 30,000? This is one man who is certainly not omniscient, but off the top of his head, he knows of probably 30,000 human fossils. So this brings us full circle to that question again. Where are all the human fossils? The answer is there's tons of them, literally and figuratively. Another example is the Calaveras skull, of which I have a replica here. Excavated in February of 1866 from a gravel bed in a gold mine some 150 feet or 45 meters below the surface of Bald Mountain in Calaveras County in California, it is a completely modern, fossilized human skull. The specific layer was actually below several lava flows, and today those auriferous gravels are dated to the Eocene, or between 35 and 56 million evolutionary years old. Today, the majority have bought into the lie that the Calaveras skull was a hoax, an Indian skull robbed from a nearby grave and planted in the mine. But as Lain and Gentet and others showed back in the 1990s, there was actually 2 skulls involved in the story. Months after the original skull was discovered, someone took an Indian skull from nearby graves and planted them in the mine as a joke. Now, I simply do not have time to detail this one case, so I will leave it to you to read and research it yourself. But I will point out to this photo, the very first photo known of the skull before the cemented and hard-packed gravels were removed from the skull. J.D. Whitney was the geologist who first brought the attention of this skull, and it was he and Dr. Wyman who chiseled off the cemented gravels and bone fragments, fossil bone fragments, embedded in the skull. The skeptics who claim this skull was an Indian skull have to then answer 2 great questions. 1, how did an Indian skull become so fossilized, so completely turned to stone, that they could not even perform carbon-14 dating on the skull? 2, how did the skull get encased, penetrated, and infilled with cemented Eocene gravels? Whitney was intimately familiar with both the local Indian burials and remains, and he was the expert on the auriferous gravels. Whitney literally wrote the book on them for the Memoirs of the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard. You'll also please notice that Whitney actually spent 30 pages in his memoir just documenting hundreds of fossil human bones from the same gravels found both before and after the Calaveras skull, and included other skull fragments and a jawbone. The man-made tools and artifacts found in those same gravels include mortars and pestles, obsidian spear and arrow points, stone scoops and ladles carved with complete well-shaped handles, and even a granite mortar 37.5 inches in diameter, weighing some 30 pounds with decorative carvings on the outside. You can see many of these items in Gentet's 1991 paper, where he photographed many of these man-made objects, which are now in the collection of the University of California at Berkeley. The majority of those items were found and documented by people other than Whitney. In fact, there is testimony of finding an entire human skeleton in the same gravels about 50 feet deeper 11 years before the Calaveras skull was discovered, and 4 years before Darwin's now infamous book made it all the rage to doubt such fossil finds. The only hoax involved here is the hoax story that was contrived to discredit this skull. Okay, I gotta rush. Fantastic must-read book, Contested Bones by Christopher Roop and Dr. John Sanford. As they demonstrate over and over again in the book, the fossil hominid finds can be broken down into two groups, ape fossils and human fossils, with a lot of variation within the groups. They also point out something that I personally missed, even though I've been studying and speaking on the creation evolution topic now for over 30 years. I've previously said the evolutionary paleontologists were mixing ape fossils together with human fossils. However, Roop and Sanford point out that all of the major human evolutionary paleontologists effectively said that in print. Humans are classified as Homo, and the ape kinds are pretty much all classified as Australopithecines. Now, looking through all the original papers from the major paleontologists, notice they all admit to finding fossils of man, Homo, right alongside ape, Australopithecines, at all the major fossil sites. Marion Lewis Leakey, which evidence included tools in campsites where it appears the apes were actually butchered and eaten by man. And yes, even Donald Johanson, who originally stated in print that Australopithecines and Homo were found together. For years, I've used Johanson as an example of an evolutionist blindly following his evolutionary assumptions. However, it appears I was mistaken. As Roop and Sanford historically document in their book, it's even more devious than what I suggested. In 1978, Donald Johanson and Tim White took a very large collection of various fossil bones and bone fragments that he acknowledged in print were a collection of human and ape bones, and grouped them all together into one fictitious creature that he dubbed Australopithecus afarensis, now popularly known as Lucy. This is the actual fossil assemblage claimed to be Lucy, which is a collection of both human and ape bones put together. They even went so far as to include fossils that Mary Leakey had identified as Homo, man, making the obviously human LH1 jawbone the holotype for the afarensis species. Now, you remember those Laetoli fossil footprints that I mentioned in lecture 27? They were distinctly human footprints. But in one brazen decision, Johanson and White just decided that those footprints were actually from their half-ape, half-human Lucy. Mary's son, Richard, would write about this turning point in 1992. Furthermore, Johanson and White said that the fossil teeth and jaws from my mother's footprint site at Laetoli were from exactly the same species as at Hadar. The fact that the Laetoli fossils were located 1,000 miles to the south and were 500,000 years older apparently did not worry Don and Tim. Now, this, of course, isn't the only time Johanson and team did this. A fossil knee joint was found by Johanson's team that was attributed to afarensis. Listen carefully. to what anatomist Owen Lovejoy says in the Nova PBS special about the fossil knee that was found and attributed to Lucy.
When Don brought the Hadar knee back from Ethiopia, he brought it over to my house and laid it out on the living room carpet. And I knew instantly that was a human knee.
Johansen and Lovejoy demonstrate that they know it's a human knee because it locks upright. Ape knees can't lock upright like yours can. And guess what? I totally agree with them. That is a fossil human knee. However, they then go on to use that fossil knee to interpret the Lucy fossils and build up the case that Lucy walked upright. The fact that the knee was found about 2 to 3 kilometers away from the other Lucy fossils and about 70 meters deeper underground, it didn't seem to slow them down one bit at all. Would you assume these fossils had anything to do with each other? I wouldn't. Now, what I'm about to share with you comes from a gentleman I will call Dr. Zed. Now, I'm Canadian. I don't remember if we pronounce the letter Z here as Z or Z because I grew up in Niagara Falls and we would get TV from the US and they said it differently than we do here in Canada. So whichever way they say it in the US, that's the way I said it. And my mom would always tell me I was saying it funny. Anyways, I will call him Dr. Zed, as he has not yet published this information and for the moment wishes to remain anonymous. He kindly gave me permission to share some of his research, and once he publishes his paper, I will be sure to include references to his work on the Complete Creation website to go with this video and DVD. Just from what he has told me, I already know that you will want to read that paper. Dr. Zed has laid forth a profound challenge to both the evolutionists and us creationists. I have here a reconstruction of Lucy's pelvis. Now, this was the pelvis which was badly smashed and distorted that Lovejoy reconstructed by using a Dremel. And they reenacted this procedure in the Nova PBS special. Now, in the past, I have mocked Lovejoy for this, and I will not retract that mocking for this reason. Can you imagine the rage and objection from the evolutionary camp if a creationist did what he did? However, Dr. Zed has pointed out something significant here. Whether or not you agree with Lovejoy's reconstruction, that is obviously a human pelvis, easily determined by the gross morphology of the innominate and in particular the sacrum. Those are human bones, not ape. That is a human pelvis, probably from a pygmy human. Pygmy humans are much more common than one would think, and in fact, Roop and Sanford actually explore this so-called island effect at great length in their book. In a 2006 issue of Journal of Creation, a creationary peer-reviewed journal, someone using the obvious pen name of Matthew Murdoch published a paper entitled "These Apes Were Made for Walking." In that paper, Murdoch pointed to multiple Australopithecine pelves from which were discovered before the now famous Lucy pelvis. And he pointed out how these pelves were clearly from a creature that walked upright. However, his entire paper basically boiled down to only one other pelvis, the one designated as STS-14. Murdoch even compares the sacrums of Lucy STS-14 with a chimpanzee and shows how STS-14 and Lucy best match that of man who walks upright. And I totally agree with Murdoch's analysis. However, Murdoch then uses that analysis to conclude that the Australopithecines, these apes, must have walked upright like man. Murdoch's fatal error was the same error I made, promoted by the evolutionary camp. The assumption that these fossils were sacrums from the Australopithecines and not man who was buried right alongside the Australopithecines. Those aren't ape fossils. They are completely human. But these human fossils have been claimed by some evolutionists to belong to the Australopithecines, and so these human fossils have been mixed together with ape fossils to build chimeras that never existed. What you are looking at is a collection of human and ape fossils portrayed to be one creature. This is just as scientific as what Johansen and team have done. They built up a chimera from different creatures and presented them as one creature. This is demonstrated by historical analysis and present-day analysis of the fossils. Each and every one of the so-called hominids alleged to support the evolution of man can be broken down into one of three groups: completely ape, completely human, or a chimera of ape and human fossils that have been mistakenly or intentionally put together to show a creature that never even existed. I've spent the last 40 lectures in this series demonstrating that we are created beings and that our creator is none other than Jesus Christ, who demonstrated his power by rising from the dead. Before he left, he said he was going to make a new heaven and a new earth because this one has been corrupted by sin. Sin which introduced death, disease, and evil into this earth. Consequently, he is going to destroy this earth and everything in it with fire because it is corrupted. Do you think he is going to allow you into the new heaven and new earth if you are contaminated by even one drop of sin? Of course not. Otherwise, we would just corrupt the new heaven and new earth. This is precisely why Christ came and paid the penalty for our sins, my sins and yours, on this earth. He said that in order to enter into the new heaven and new earth, you must be born again. That is simply acknowledging your sins, acknowledging your need to be saved, and surrendering your life wholly to him, living your life here in this earth for his will. I hope that you will do that quickly because he did say he was coming back soon. All right, I have to call this series a wrap. Thank you for joining me, and God bless you.
You can catch the entire series in a variety of ways. You can watch the show online at www.completecreation.org or www.genesisweek.com. You can also purchase the Complete Creation series in full high definition on Blu-ray or video on demand at completecreation.org. Or support the Miracle Channel with a monthly tax-deductible donation and access the entire Complete Creation series in high definition through Corco, Miracle Channel's video on demand service. We need your support to keep this program on the air. So please pray for us. And if you wish to financially support the program, Canadians can make a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, K2K2P4. Or you can make a donation via PayPal online at ianjuby.org/donations. And thank you for your support.